I think it's very easy to gravitate towards like structure, process, things that are measurable that you can put metrics around. Obviously, this idea of alignment and, continue to like build in feedback loops. I think if you kind of zoom out, ultimately, like hiring is a human judgment call. It's very emotional and it's kind of based on imperfect information on both sides, right? And so, really, at the core of all of what we do, it's just about building trust.
Welcome to Offer Accepted, the podcast that elevates your recruiting game. I'm your host, Shannon Ogborn. Join us for conversations with talent leaders, executives, and more to uncover the secrets to building and leading successful talent acquisition teams. Gain valuable insights and actionable advice from analyzing cutting-edge metrics to confidently claiming your seat at the table. Let's get started. Well, hello and welcome to another episode of Offer Accepted. I'm Shannon Ogborn, your host, and this episode is brought to you by Ashby, the all-in-one recruiting platform empowering ambitious teams from seed to IPO and beyond. Woo! Thank you for the energy. I could not be more excited. I have known Mike for several years now. Some may know him as one of the pillars of recruiting operations, so it's no surprise for him to join us at our first conference on the RecOps stage and the first episode of Offer Accepted Live. Mike, for those who don't know, is one of the founding partners at Growth by Design Talent and has spent his career helping high-growth companies like Apple, Facebook, Pinterest build really strong recruiting foundations. He's led organizations through IPOs, built teams from scratch, and now advises companies on everything from structured interviewing to ATS rollouts. And a little bit personal about him, when he's not doing that, he is playing soccer or chasing great coffee. Mike, thank you so much for joining us.
Love the coffee.
Well, I know that one of the things that we've talked a lot about is about talent teams evolving, especially in this AI era and beyond. I would love to hear a little bit of context about why you think TA teams must evolve.
Well, first, thanks for having me. Congrats. Kudos to the team. This conference has been amazing. Starting with just the context that we're all in, I think the feeling is like we're off to the races, right? We have this transformative technology and every company, every stage, every industry is trying to figure out how to boost their business and take advantage of that. And you have companies that are now accelerating faster than any company in history in terms of getting to hundreds of millions of dollars in ARR in months, not years. And I think what that has also shown as well is that those teams are doing that and accomplishing that in, with very lean teams, right? And so that's a much different kind of context in prior maybe waves that we've gone through in the past. And I think what that means for us in the talent space is maybe overall net hiring for companies is maybe a little bit less than before. And when I think about that, it's like every hire that now a company is making, there's this more at stake, right? It's this higher leverage and there's just more emphasis on really driving quality. And when I think about traditional recruiting, where we see that pop up all the time, and we have, part of this is our business, is exec recruiting, right? It's such a curated experience. There's time and care taken because the stakes are so high if you have a mishire, where you're really calibrating on the role, you're making sure there's alignment across the team. And on the candidate side, you're really taking care and time to understand like what is the thing that's going to really progress someone in their career, because if they make a wrong decision, then the stakes are even higher, right? Because it's much harder to hire or to find that next executive role. And what I'm optimistic about and what I hope for us is that wouldn't it be great if every candidate had that same experience? And what I hope that AI will unlock for all of us is that we're able to invest that time into things that just weren't financially feasible to do before, right? Like there aren't enough hours in the day to be able to do that for every candidate today. And so that's for teams. I think for individuals, I think we're all kind of just trying to struggle to kind of keep up a little bit. And one of the things that you hear all the time is what's actually going to happen to certain roles and certain types of work in our space. And I guess now been around for long enough and done recruiting ops and people ops for long enough to see some roles kind of come and go. And I think if you think about every job as some collection of tasks, of course, if a high percentage of those tasks are like manual and things that can be automated, then those are probably going to, give way to, your AI teammates. In reflecting back to the jobs that I've seen come and go, right? Like there used to literally be someone's job to take physical resumes, scan them into a system, quality check and make sure that that was true. And it's like, okay, that's not the best, but it was like a useful and something necessary for you to actually drive your process. Same thing on the employee side with, HR records and things like that. And so it's inevitably like work that actually is kind of crappy. Like no one really wants to do it. It's just you kind of have to endure doing it. And what you're really excited about is, seeing all of the net new roles that get created when you have this transformative technologies that come, right? So in the onset of the internet, now you have web designers, web developers with, app, mobile, app platforms. Now you have app developers. With cloud, you have like now SaaS and, enabling things like Ashby to exist. And in a lot of ways, I kind of owe, a lot of this like technical sort of evolution to, the creation of profession that I've grown to love in the recruiting ops space. And that's been enabled by, the onset of data and systems and, companies really needing to prioritize how do you make the most of those capabilities.
Yeah, and to one of your earlier points about companies spending so much time and sort of like the why evolution needs to happen, companies, even one of our trends reports showed how much more time a company is spending interviewing now more than ever with less resources. And so evolving to those AI elements, you're going to have to make up the time somewhere. You have higher responsibilities with less people. And so, how can you evolve to make that possible? And I think part of that is this innovation as a practice. So, in order to evolve, you have to innovate. Can you tell me your thoughts on the concept of innovation as a practice?
Yeah, I mean, first, it's like I think it's very easy to feel overwhelmed right now, just with the amount of change, the amount of information kind of coming at you. With, I mean, like mind's blown on all the product features just today on what now Ashby is going to be capable of doing. So for me, the thing that's allowed me to kind of like just get a little bit more grounded, but then still, lean into the curiosity, lean into the learning is, kind of time boxing things in a way, just getting into the habit of, creating space and space and time to actually like learn and process. And so for me, those are like Wednesday and Friday mornings. And so whatever that is for you, I think if it doesn't get scheduled, it's just very easy to get just kind of overwhelmed with the fire of the day or the task of the day. And so, being able to take that time, get caught up on, whatever the latest things are. And I think just getting hands on and just trying things. And so for me, like where I start is trying to figure out, what are the things that are just really frustrating that just eat up just a ton of time that it's kind of like there must be a better way, right? And
We're on
now
Shark
there's
Tank now.
oh my god, there are so many aha moments where, if you just kind of start to dabble, start to kind of dip your toe, they're like, oh wow, that's possible. And I think another thing that we've kind of started to do within our GBD team is kind of share what we're learning. And I think that's also an unlock, right? So just, realizing that it may not be something that was obvious to you, but someone, was able to discover some new insight and like, oh my God, that's like blowing my mind. And I'm going to be doing that, immediately. One of the things too that can be challenging is I think there's this dynamic right now where CEOs and executives are seeing the massive opportunity that this new technology is unlocking in their business. And it's either the carrot or the stick, right? They're like mandating employees, like, spend time. This is now part of your job, or just, kind of putting that as now a new value. As an IC, it can be very easy to get kind of lost in that, right? I think there's some element of like, there's now more that's being asked of people than ever before. And I think there is a little bit of fear. It's like, okay, like if I actually, figure this out, then that's work that I'm now not going to be doing. And so I think companies that are doing, I think, walking this line in a really, intentional, meaningful way are sort of helping navigate employees out of that fear, right? So I think ServiceNow is an example where, I was just talking to a leader the other day where they now have internal models. They're able to, stand up, kind of tier one support. And so, their people ops and HR ops seemed like that was their job to respond to employee questions and inquiries and things. And that went away. But in a way to support that, they were also reskilling those same people to become HRBPs and people partners. And if you could only afford to get that time and invest it somewhere else, I mean, this is a perfect example of where you can really add a lot more value into the business by kind of automating some of that stuff that really didn't add a ton of value in the first place.
Yeah, and I think on the note of innovation, agility is equally as important, both as an individual and as a company. If you aren't agile and you're not using that in the form of innovation, you're going to have a lot of problems because you can only keep up. Like most companies, especially SaaS companies, have competitors that they're trying to keep up with or edge out. And if someone's doing something that you're not, you're already a little bit behind. And so having the agility, and I think hiring people with that skill set or mindset is actually going to be part of the future of hiring.
Yeah, I mean, some of the best people I've ever worked with are constantly trying to figure out how to get out of the mundane stuff, right? And focus on the thing that's more meaningful. And inevitably, yeah, I mean, portions of their job they actually, kind of automate or, or even just stop doing because it's not like high value. But they're spending times on the things that actually do. And those are the people that generally kind of have this hockey stick kind of career, to them because they're constantly learning into, something bigger and more meaningful to the team.
Absolutely. And one just, I guess, tangential comment to this is I've noticed in terms of people who are evolving with I actually feel like job seekers have been evolving better with AI than some people that are in the job, because there's a lot of jobs now that have been demanding this aspect of innovation within individuals. And I've noticed that a lot of folks and we know that the market's been tough in the last couple of years, a lot of the job seekers I know are just so freaking good at the AI stuff. And they are upskilling because they know what the market is looking for in terms of those skills. So that's an interesting trend that I've been seeing on the innovation piece.
I think part of it too is that, a lot of companies have not been super great at defining where the edges of the sandbox are, right? So if I'm an employee, it's like, okay, I don't want to do the wrong thing, so therefore I'm not going to risk it, right? Because, you don't want to put data in the wrong place, or you don't want to try this thing that actually, is not, okay. And so, yeah, I mean, I think providing some level of clarity, and we're talking to a number of teams that are trying to be as intentional about this, where, there is kind of this ethos that's now a new direction for the company, and, trying to be thoughtful about how do you provide the operating principles and sort of the edges of the sandbox so people can start to experiment and feel okay about that.
Definitely. One of the things you alluded to earlier was the shape of teams, who's on these teams, what do the roles look like, how many should there be? I think what might be helpful for the folks here is to understand a little bit about what does the future talent team look like in your eyes, especially based off of all the companies you're working with.
Yeah, I mean, no one's going to get it right, right? I think that's true. Like if you were to try to predict, how things have evolved, it's interesting because I think some companies are already starting to show just signs of how this might sort of evolve, right? I think it's even just within the last week, Moderna just merged their IT and HR teams. ServiceNow, I mentioned, their chief people officer is also their chief AI enablement officer. The chief people officer at Roblox is also their systems officer. And so the CIO reports into them. And so you can see a world where, the people implications are very real, right? But obviously the technology aspect of that is, both a technical thing, but then also, a cultural thing as well in terms of how that gets implemented and communicated across the company. I kind of see like the class of kind of jobs that potentially, evolve for talent teams in kind of like almost just like two dimensions, right? And so on the one dimension, you have humans, right? People, us. And on the other dimension, you have like machines or like your AI teammates, and those probably even have like names, right? And I think I'm even just thinking back, Clara was like a scheduling thing, back in Devon's now an automated, coder, right? That exists now, right now. So if you look at a couple of these dimensions, right? So human to human, right? Talent and hiring is ultimately like an emotional decision. It's a big decision that people need to make. And ultimately, it kind of comes down to trust that it's going to be something that is going to further someone's career, and that, teams are going to feel like they have the person that's going to, change the trajectory of their teams. I think there are a couple of different roles that can kind of come out of that, right? That really, optimize for the time that you get back. I think one is this idea that, and I think we were talking about this in one of the earlier sessions around intermobility. And so I think really thoughtful companies have like really invested in people that can help employees discover career pathways. And even experienced people, I think sometimes don't know that, based on their experience, there are actually unlocks in other paths that they could explore. And it kind of takes someone to kind of coach them and, learn about their motivations, learn about their skills and their backgrounds to kind of open their eyes to those possibilities. And I think the same thing is true on the hiring manager side of, great recruiters are, advising managers because they understand the context of their teams, and in some ways can guide them into like thinking about maybe not the edge cases that could potentially, be, game changers for their teams. So that's this idea of kind of like a career guide, right? Like the best recruiters I've ever worked with play the long game all the time, right? So they truly understand, the best talent, and it's really just about timing, right? And, the right opportunity kind of coming up when they're ready to move. Another category is just, I think, something that is very real right now, which is like, there's a lot of fraud. There's a lot of, stuff that people are having to get through. And so even if it's in a short term, like actual verification, right? Someone's job to sort of define how does that show up in a meaningful, thoughtful, intentional way through your process, like gets
without hurting the
what
candidate experience,
right.
because that is the big thing right now. There are some people who just like don't really have a digital footprint, especially in roles like, let's just say, like CISO roles or more like security based roles. A lot of those folks just don't really have a lot of online profiles for reasons that they just know so much about security. And so you might overshoot that and try to make an accusation that they're a fake candidate or fake profile, and in fact it's just that they have a low.
Yeah, so I do think it needs to be a thoughtful thing, right? To that point, like you still need to get the signal, like, is this actually the person that we're interviewing? And the person that showed up for the job is the person that we thought we were going to get. I mean, that's actually, it's a real thing. And, hopefully that resolves itself. But I think, having someone focused on figuring out what is the thoughtful design around how to solve for that. I think the other category is this idea of like that curated experience. Like I was saying, if you can actually give everyone the exec recruiting experience, what would that look like? And it's probably you're going to have access to much better people. And so having people that actually it's their job to figure out how do you curate the experience for candidates through the process, I think can be a big unlock for teams. And so that's the human to human side. I think the human to machine side, or the human to sort of AI teammate side, I kind of think of like three different categories of things. And you can kind of start seeing some of this popping up now. And I think the question is, does it sit within the people org, or does it sit within this IT org, or is it kind of a blend? I think you have your AI sort of, strategists, right? That your architects, right? So these are people that have domain expertise and talent and people, but they really, essentially become sort of the product managers to figure out what is the whole ecosystem of available tools. How do those things sort of interact with each other? What are the ethics and the policies and governance around these sorts of things? Like what's actually okay for us to use versus not? And then there are people that I think are, just take those systems and then are just executing at scale, right? And so I do think that these are people that really understand what is their workflow within recruiting, but then can actually extend, because these agents can work 24 hours a day, right? So there are certainly, lower complexity roles, higher volume that could kind of be fairly automated, but you need someone sort of at the wheel making sure that, that's tuned to the right thing. And I think that the other category is this idea of like AI coaches, right? And I think this is where you have people that have been in the talent space for a really long time. And it's effectively you have probably the smartest teammate that you've ever had, but they have no expertise in like your domain or how certain teams or certain roles need to optimize for. And it's just a continual process. I was actually reminded of this. We had someone recently join our team, very bright, very capable, but, was new to tech and new to recruiting. And just like coming in and out of me is like, that was a word salad. Can you explain to me like what actually just happened? And I think very similarly, these general models are like very capable, but figuring out how do you actually tune that for not just recruiting overall, but then, specifically for the roles that you're trying to hire for and what great looks like. And I think that's going to come from people that have been in the space for a long time.
That actually brings up a question around sort of the subject matter expertise and more generalist. I know that we previously talked about skills that will matter. I guess kind of a brief fire off. Are expectations going to get more niche or more broad?
Yeah, I've kind of heard the back and forth of this debate. I kind of see that there's a possibility that, rather than specialize around functions, you get specialized around career stages, right? So meaning people that are at, a certain point in their career, maybe a certain sort of level expectation, because part of your role on the talent side is really trying to figure out where does this person fit within our organization? And I think the challenge that we've had thus far, it's kind of like, okay, well, they didn't fit for this role, but then you had no context of this other role, maybe is like the perfect fit. And I think if you had, someone who's constantly curating these certain pools of talent, but then have broader context across the entire organization, you are much more likely to be able to find maybe like dots that weren't obvious that you can connect, both from the business perspective as well as on the candidate side.
Yeah, there's a lot of missed opportunities in, okay, we're rejecting this candidate for this role, but not a lot of investigation goes into could they be great for another role that we just don't have purview.
Yeah, and I've been at like earlier stage startups and the larger enterprises, and you can kind of see that progression happen. It's like in the earlier stages, everyone's tuned for like the company, right? And everyone's aware of like all the different roles, and it's very, I guess, more free in terms of like how candidates get shared across. My hope is that there's some unlocks that can happen when you're able to, automate some of the, again, like you just have more time to be more connected into other parts of the business, versus, today where, a decent part of the job, just kind of gets sucked into, just day-to-day stuff that doesn't necessarily add a ton of value.
Definitely. Well, we are on the Rec Ops stage, so I think that probably folks are wondering, what does this mean for Rec Ops and what action plan can Rec Ops take?
I mean, if I think about the makeup of a lot of Rec Ops people, I mean, they're builders. They just love to kind of get in there and craft great experiences. They love getting their hands dirty in technology. They love new things, right? But again, kind of back to the overwhelm, like, because I also know that there's just a real reality that, also being in any operations role and kind of in any function, there's like your day can get blown up in a second, right? It's like you might have a perfect plan for your day, and like this, the thing that happens is like you just have to focus on getting it over the finish line. And again, I think my advice would be a couple of things. One thing that can help shortcut to some of these insights is just following great people that are already aggregating a lot of this knowledge together. And so for me, thinking about some of those people, there's obviously Hung Lee with the Brain Food podcast. There's obviously this podcast, which has a ton of new insights. Sarah Tavel is an investor and partner at Benchmark. She does an amazing job of like framing markets and how that fits. Lenny's podcast is one that I follow, which is really, kind of geared towards product and product leaders, but there's so many corollaries over to talent. And 100% of the time I walk away with some new insight. And then I think just this idea of, I can't remember who said this first, but I love this idea of just increasing your exposure time, because I think with that just has compounding effects in terms of your learning, right? Like if you just can't make it a habit every day or every couple of days, like putting in, a handful of minutes or hours into just practicing and getting your hands in there, you're just going to be, way more prepared than a large majority of people. And I think the reality is today, there's not really any experts, right? And so
It could be one of you.
it could be, and so it doesn't take a lot to get you into that
Right.
space, right? And I think that the way I've seen a lot of this, play out over time is some of the most successful like sourcers that I've ever seen. Like they were just very early in trying to figure out like Boolean search. Like they were just the masters of that. And then some just learn like lightweight scripting and coding, and then they can generate candidate lists and qualified lists. And they're like 100,000x more productive than people, when it's not like they were any smarter, but they got to,
Well, I think it's no complacency.
exactly. They were just curious enough to really to learn. And I think they were just like frustrated with the inefficiency of things. And I think now what's great is like you don't have to learn how to code or script. Like everyone has equal access to being able to unlock that potential.
Definitely. A lot of folks here have heard hiring excellence repeated a couple of times in a lot of the sessions we've done both here and upstairs. So we always love to ask our guests, when you hear hiring excellence, what does that mean to you?
Yes. Okay. So as a recruiting ops person, I think it's very easy to gravitate towards like structure, process, things that are measurable that you can put metrics around. Obviously, this idea of alignment and, continue to like build in feedback loops. I think if you kind of zoom out, ultimately, like hiring is a human judgment call. It's very emotional, and it's kind of based on imperfect information on both sides, right? And so really at the core of all of what we do, it's just about building trust, right? And so then how do you do that, right? And so to borrow a framework from Frances Fry, so she's the person that went into Uber during like its pretty, gnarly times. Like they'd broken trust with customers, they'd broken trust with employees and investors. And she introduced like this framework that I love, and it's called the trust triangle. And like the elements of building trust are authenticity, like is it logical, and then is your empathy directed towards me. And so if you think about like how that applies to excellent recruiting practices and teams, authenticity, like are you able to clearly articulate what is it like to work at your company? Like what are the things that you actually value? How do decisions get made? And I think the companies that are exceptional at this are so clear at why you should not work at their company.
We literally have a section of our job postings that say why you should not have this job.
Right. So
why wouldn't you want this job?
Right. And that is so great for candidates to know, like, okay, that's great. Like, sign me up. Or, yep, nope, that's not for me. And so, like, if you think about like a Netflix and a Google and a Meta and a more recent like Coinbase taking like a very clear stance, and it's definitely not for everyone. It's true to them and what they value. And I think that's the thing that I think makes the process really efficient, right? Because it's more like this dog whistle recruiting where it's like you're attracting the right people and they're the ones that are kind of seeing it. So that's authenticity. And then I think on the logic side, it's like, okay, does it make sense, right? Okay, on the hiring team
Harder
side,
than you think.
harder than you think. Like, so for the like if you're on the hiring team, it's like, okay, like I understand why we need this role. I understand my focus area and what I'm trying to assess for. I understand what we're prioritizing here. And then if you're a candidate, like you just have transparency, like what is the process going to be run? How is that decision going to get made? And then if you don't get the job, I think it's more like, okay, I'm disappointed, but like I understand. And I think on this last dimension of sort of empathy, I think this is so important, and it's something else that some great folks that I've worked with. It's like this concept of like caring is free, right? So when you talk about like a recruiting process, I think a lot of people think about like the tooling and like all these investments, but kind of at the core, it's like, have you taken the time to as a recruiter to really understand the dynamics that a hiring manager is having to solve for? There could be like political things going on within the team. There could be, pressure. They need to ship things like sooner than later, and it's like all falling on them. And then on the candidate side, have you really taken the time to understand what is the true motivation that's a candidate's trying to solve for the next step in their career? And, the really great recruiters take those extra moments to really get that insight and to, kind of connect maybe, dots that weren't obvious.
The thing that I had noticed over being an individual contributor recruiter over several years was there were recruiters who could just churn through candidates and they'd hire people and they'd hire people and they'd hire people, but they would never hire a rejection ever again. Whereas people who really cared about the candidate and they cared that they didn't get their dream job this time, but they really wanted them to get it next time, those people had to work less hard, honestly, long term, because people knew that they cared about them and they trusted them not only at the company they were at, but at a future company. They would look up the recruiter and say, hey, I see you moved to such and such. I think this is a great company. Like, could you get me in touch with someone for this role? And then they would hire them. And the care, it shouldn't be for that reason, but I think it does actually have really strong long tail impacts on your work as a talent professional.
It's so true. I mean, just being kind to people goes a long way. And you see it over and over again. Like hiring managers remember the great recruiters and they take them with them. And then I think candidates are very, very much the same. Unfortunately, I think there are maybe more bad experiences than great and exceptional ones. And so like the exceptional ones really stand out. And when those candidates are, ready to make a move, they know who to be in touch with. And I think more importantly, if that recruiter goes to another company, then that may be a no-name brand company, or it's maybe hasn't broken out, or it's still in stealth, and they have the relationship and the trust to be able to contact these people that otherwise would not return their call or their outreach.
Yeah, they don't yet trust the company, but they trust you. And if the company's hired you, they think, okay, well, if they've hired this person, I feel like I can trust the company because this person is there
100%.
advocating for me. Well, we are at our last question here, especially with your tenure in the space, both in-house and your work with GBD. I would love to hear, what is your recruiting hot take?
Okay, so I kind of hate this line that keeps going around our community, which is like recruiters aren't going to be replaced, but recruiters not using AI
Boo.
are going to be replaced. And I think, okay, so maybe like if we're a couple months into like ChatGPT, we're like several years in now. And to me, like when you have a transformative technology, it's like touching every aspect of society, our personal lives, our, working lives. It's just kind of like table stakes. So like if you take your job and profession seriously, it's something that you're spending time doing. And as you mentioned, I play a lot of soccer. And so to me, it's like the equivalent of saying like, okay, soccer players aren't going to be replaced, but soccer players not, without cleats are going to be replaced. It's kind of like, sure, yeah, it's like pretty obvious, right? If you are wanting to be competitive, you want to win, you take the tools that are available to you and you kind of lace up and get after it. And I think the thing there is back to the individuals that are really leaning into the curiosity, I think are essentially creating an unfair advantage for them. And then over time, like things become available to everyone. It becomes much more obvious. Maybe it gets productized into, products like Ashby. But I think right now it's kind of this moment in time where if you're really leaning into that learning, you're creating like a ton of advantage for yourself to, kind of like that hockey stick career growth that I think I've seen a bunch of people that, in these moments in time are really taking advantage of the new capabilities.
Yeah, and I think there's several things going on in the market now. Some is AI driven, some is economy market driven, that there might be less roles. So like there may be people in any role that are moved into different capacities, But as far as recruiters go, you can have all the tools in the world and you could have a tool that runs your process A to Z, but humans connect with humans to join a company that they work with humans. So not having any of that in the process, I just like the role will evolve, but doing rid of entirely, I think is like a misguided, to your point, like it doesn't quite make sense to me.
I mean, almost 100% of the time, if you ask someone, what was the memorable thing about your experience at a company?
It was the video interview.
It was the video interview. It was the video interview. I mean, inevitably, like, there are big, significant milestones of work that, you kind of like worked really hard to ship, but ultimately it's the relationships that you had and the people that you had the opportunity to really get to know. And I don't think that's going to change.
Completely agree with you. Well, I think we are coming up on our time. Where should people go to learn more about you and your work?
LinkedIn, Mike at gbdtalent.com, and gbdtalent.com is our website if you want to kind of check out what we do. So thanks for having me.
Amazing. Well, Mike, can't thank you enough for joining us on our first live episode of Offer Accepted. Super stoked that we've gotten to this point and hope people will give you a follow because you got lots of interesting things to say. Follow the GBD newsletter.
Yes, our newsletter.
That's another thing. But thank you all for joining us and we'll see you next time.
Thanks.
This episode was brought to you by Ashby. What an ATS should be. A scalable, all-in-one tool that combines powerful analytics with your ATS, scheduling, sourcing, and CRM. To never miss an episode, subscribe to our newsletter at www.ashbyhq.com/podcast. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.